Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between. If you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, your window to insight, information, and inspiration in the business of guitar, this is episode 30 of GBR. Kind of feels like a milestone number of sorts, but they come so fast now, it seems like every episode is some kind of milestone. And in a way, I guess they are. For instance, on today's show, we're joined by the well-known Canadian bass builder, Sheldon Dingwall. Now, many of you undoubtedly know of him, have seen him or the Dingwall line of basses, all of which, by the way, 100% are fanned fret multi-scale instruments and have been ever since the 90s. He has quite a story to tell that includes surviving a catastrophic event in his business and what it took to rebuild everything from scratch while ending up better off and stronger for the experience. It's a very engaging interview, so stay tuned for that upcoming. And once again, I'm happy to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Guitar PR. And in full disclosure, Guitar PR is a division of the same company that owns this show, Guitar Business Media. And admittedly, this message probably isn't for everybody. If you love guitar, but you're in the auto parts business, Guitar PR is not for you. But if you are a guitar-related business, organization, or professional on the smaller side, meaning less than generally 25 employees or so, and that's most, then Guitar PR provides affordable, structured PR news, media, and marketing services to help you increase sales and grow your business. But really, you may be asking, what does this all have to do with you? After all, who knows your business better than you? The answer is probably nobody. But let's face it, none of us knows everything, and we all see things through our own lens. So getting a different view, kind of like a second opinion, is a good thing now and then. In addition to offering an array of tangible services, Guitar PR looks at and sees your operation differently. And that makes us different. And it doesn't cost a thing to find out if Guitar PR is right for you. Just visit the website at guitarpr.com. You can get a free assessment and consultation and a $50 credit just for mentioning GBR. Guitar PR, PR news and marketing for the guitar universe. So as most of you know, you can get podcasts from a variety of apps and platforms. The majority, I expect, are listening on your phone, the rest on tablets, notebooks, and desktops. Of course, you can always listen to episodes directly on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com, which looks great on small and big screens. But some of the other places you'll find us include, of course, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, TuneIn, on and on and on. And really any place else where podcasts are seen and heard, usually all you have to do is search for Guitar Business, because that's what we do and what we're known for. We are the channel for the business of guitar. And just a quick note on the upcoming launch of Guitar Business Daily and later on Guitar Business Magazine. We originally thought the Daily would be live in August, but obviously it's now September. So we're substituting September for any place we previously said August. But if you have any questions or are interested in editorial contributor opportunities, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us at editor@guitar.business or just call us at 888-777-2404. That's 888-777-2404. And while we're waiting to hear from you, here's something completely different. Well, Sheldon Dingwall has been building innovative bass guitars with passion and dedication for nearly 3 decades in Saskatoon. That's about 1,700 miles northeast from us, up in the middle of Canada. Today, his company occupies a 6,000 square foot facility that produces nothing but high-quality fan-fret multi-scale basses, as they have since the beginning. But the story of how he got where he is today is not a straight line, and there were a few significant bumps along the way. But we'll hear about that and much more as Sheldon Dingwall joins us right here and right now. Well, Sheldon, thanks so much for joining us here today, and welcome to GBR. Great to have you on the show.
Well, great to be here. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Great. Okay, well, let's just get started. In fact, let's start with something of historical significance. Like a lot of builders that we talk to, you started off as a player and at a very young age, but also at a young age, you became an entrepreneur of sorts. And this all set the stage for what was to come later. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that period.
I grew up in a musical household. Both of my sisters made their living in the arts. My mother was a piano teacher, so I started piano lessons at, 4 or 5 years old. But even earlier than that, even when I was too small to be able to see the tops of the keys, I'd walk up to the piano and I'd be banging on the keys, and I still remember hitting these keys, and they're above my head, and hitting the bass keys and hearing the strings ring out, and then toddling over to the other end of the piano and hitting the treble keys and hearing them go plink, 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 and I'd always gravitate back to the bass keys and just hit a long sustained note and just listen to those harmonics ring out, not knowing at all what significance that would have later on in life.
Well, that's amazing. That's really interesting. Yeah.
And whatever passion I get into, just the way my mind works, I start disassembling in my mind the equipment and start thinking of ways to improve it. So along the way, I've designed skateboards. We're actually trademarked. The Dingwall brand is trademarked for longboards as well as guitars, although we don't do longboards anymore.
No. Were you involved in that as a kid, or?
I was. I got the skateboard bug early. It's when the urethane revolution took over with wheels. I was like the first kid in my city with one of these new skateboards, and I got quite involved in it. Competed on the amateur circuit, went all the way to the Canadian Nationals, but we lived inland, so we have long winters. And when I skated with the Vancouver guys, oh my God, I got my butt handed to me, because those guys can skate all year round. The level of talent out there was just unbelievable. So that was the end of that career.
Did you build any of your skateboards at all, or were you okay? So you started to work with wood and building things at that point, right?
Yeah, so it came from a musical family, not a tool family. So we had relatively few tools, and I remember having to use the sidewalk out in front of our house as a grinder because we didn't have one. So
wow.
I used the concrete and just ground the edges of the skateboard on that. So and I think that's important for anyone who's learning something new. I mean, if you really want to do something, it doesn't matter if you don't have the tools, you'll find a way. I mean, we've seen videos of kids, amazing drummers, playing on tin cans, because that's all they had. And,
sure.
And, I think it's actually probably good to start your kid out on a really crappy guitar, because if that scares them away, well, they were never meant for the guitar in the first place. But if they persevere in spite of the fact that they're playing on something with a mile-high action that hurts their fingers, then you have somebody that's really passionate for it.
Now, did you start with other instruments besides the piano? I think you told me you did at some point, right?
Well, yeah, actually before piano came baritone ukulele. That was my sister's, and I used to drive them crazy because standard tuning made no sense to me because it didn't sound musical. So I open tune it to whatever chord sounded good to my 4-year-old ears, and then I could play it just by barring my finger across the frets. And my sister would freak out because then she'd have to retune it in order to play from her books. So baritone uke, piano, drums started at about the age of 10, and then guitar was at about 12.
Now, you told me the other day that you started to have some entrepreneurial activity at a fairly young age. What was that about?
I guess the first would have been the skateboard business. I sold a few of them. When you're 16 years old, how many can you manufacture? How many can you sell?
Of course.
So, a couple. But
but that's a start.
It was a start, and everything's a stepping stone to the next level. And so the next level came when I'd written a bunch of songs and I was shopping them to record companies, and I had interest from some really small companies that I just thought they were too sketchy. I'd never heard of them. I didn't have a good feeling when I was talking to them. So I thought, screw it, I'll just do this myself. So I started my own record company.
At what age?
This was 19, I think.
Okay.
And then tracked down. Back then, everything was vinyl. So I needed to find a pressing plant. So I tracked down CBS Special Products Unit and negotiated for them to press my little 45s and came up with a cover design. And I didn't know enough about typesetting at that time. I actually never even heard of typesetting. So I did all the typesetting with letter set, one letter at a time.
Oh, sure. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah. And took it in, and the guy said, you did this by hand? We could have done this in 5 minutes. Oh, well. Of course. I was in that business so a long time ago.
I miss letter set. That stuff was fun.
Yeah, we used a lot of that. We used a lot of that back in the late 70s. And yeah, so I have a whole nother story on that, but not for this interview. So.
Okay. Just on a quick side note, that is still, that technology is still used today for logos. So there's a company that specializes in doing logos for guitar companies. And so if it isn't an inlaid pearl, if it looks like a silk screened logo, chances are it's a rub-on transfer, similar to letter set.
I've seen that. And then you that just goes on the headstock, and then you finish over it and that sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen that. I've seen that. Well, let's move on a little bit from that. And it seems that your entry into what would ultimately become your guitar and then bass building career started when you were still working as a player with an idea for a better neck. So I'd like to know how that worked and what eventually came of it. It's a good story. Now
that I think about it, it actually started a little earlier than that. This would have been about 20. I'd heard about a Floyd Rose, and the Floyd Rose was this mythical product that in Canada nobody stocked them. They hadn't made it up here yet. There weren't any photos of it, but guys were on the club circuit were talking about this amazing bridge that you never had to tune your guitar, and so going by about a 1-inch square photo, I couldn't figure out what was going on. So sat down and designed my own, and that was my first entry into guitar building, was designing and building my own version of the Floyd Rose, just for my own use.
Got it. Okay. And how did that work? Did it work?
It worked beautifully. It was crude. It was ugly. It was uncomfortable, but it absolutely did the job. And I took it out and I toured playing every night with that bridge, and from that point on, I got the bug, and so then it was, well, I've got a neck idea. How do I do that? And so I had a couple of custom necks made for me by Larrivee, and I had them send them to me uncarved, and they were really specific widths. They thought I was crazy, tried to talk me out of it, but I knew what I wanted, and so I paid them whatever it would cost to get these necks out there. And so I carved them with an asymmetric carve and then scalloped them. And this was all done in hotel rooms as I was touring, and so there was ebony dust everywhere in the sheets on the floor. The maids were not impressed.
Well, tell us a little bit about, before we go too much further, tell us a little bit about how the scalloping worked and then the asymmetric neck carving. explain that a little bit for maybe a few folks that don't know what that is.
Well, typically necks are carved symmetrically, so the base side of the neck feels the exact same as the treble side. If you were to flip the neck over and it would feel virtually the same. An asymmetric carve, and it can be done two different ways. You can either make the base side thicker and the treble side thinner. So if you're like a thumb hanging over the edge of the fingerboard type of player, you've got meat right where the joint between your thumb and first finger are, and then you've got thinness to try and make your fingers just feel a little bit longer as they wrap around the neck.
Sure.
Or you could do it the other way, and you could put a little bit more meat on the treble side and thin down the bass side if you're a thumb behind the neck player. And so that supports your hand as you're playing, and it makes the neck feel a little thinner for your thumb. So this was something that I thought was I'd invented, and for all intents and purposes, in my own world, I had invented it, but was just unaware that this was something that was done by Mike Tobias years before. So with that idea, and then scalloping was something that was a bit of an 80s fad. Yngwie Malmsteen and John McLaughlin were the two main guys that were doing, but more were doing it. Essentially, what it means is it's just scooping away the fingerboard between the frets, and that allows you to use smaller frets for more precise intonation. But it gives you it removes the wood surface underneath your fingertips. So now when you do vibrato, it's really smooth. The string sinks deeper into your callus, and so you get a better grip on it. And you really, if you've got subtle technique already, it makes it feel like you've got way more control over the strings. You can vibrato entire chords, and bending is so much easier. So it is really cool. But it was kind of an 80s thing, and it went out of style, and it hasn't come back since.
So what did you do with it, though?
Well, I was a believer in it, and initially I wasn't. I thought it was crazy, and I thought it would be too hard to play, but I ran across a Gittler guitar, which is, if you watch the Synchronicity 2 video, you see Andy Summers playing what looks to be a fish skeleton, but it's actually actually a guitar.
Yeah, it's an interesting looking thing.
Made by Alan Gittler. And I think he was the actual inventor of the headless tuning system. I think he predated Steinberger on that, but I don't think he ever patented it. At any rate, once I tried those, I was an instant believer. And so as I was finishing out my career, I'd set myself a limit of I'm only going to play professionally until I'm 25. Because at that time I thought 25 was old age. So I'm thinking if I haven't achieved my musical goals by the time I'm 25, I'm never going to achieve them. So I'm out of here. And so I made it to 25, and I saw the trajectory of where I was going, and I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't in the cards for me. So what's my next move? And that was to start a guitar neck business, and just sell these scallop replacement necks for Strats. And I had a couple other tweaks that were kind of cool, and so the business started off relatively well on a small scale. That being said, I was at the tail end of the parts guitar business, and so people were less interested in buying replacement necks by the time I came on the scene.
And that was about when, Sheldon?
That was 86 to about 88.
Okay.
And so the whole guitar parts scene kind of started up in the early 80s. Eddie Van Halen would have been the guy that got everybody interested in it. And then by about 86, there were companies like Jackson and Charvel, and everybody had kind of figured out what a Super Strat was, and you could buy a Super Strat rather than trying to make one yourself out of parts.
So that was that kind of reached its peak, so to speak, and you transitioned how? Well,
the next led to people wanting bodies, and so once I designed a couple of bodies, that led to people wanting completed guitars, and so I was kind of, it sounds like I'm being a bit of a I'll sell to anyone type of person, but literally, I mean, when you have limited sales, you have to sell to anyone. So I was selling to parts to that we'd manufacture to other small builders in the U.S. and in Asia, and then I was selling directly to whoever would, pick up the phone and give me a call. And so the next led to bodies, which led to complete guitars, which led to requests for bass guitars, and I had no concept of what was a good bass or what wasn't. And that's actually not a bad position to be in, because it forces you to listen to your customer. When I was building guitars, I was building guitars that appealed to me, and I'm a pretty tweaky guy, so not everybody cares about the stuff I cared about. I would do things like I would engineer the lower cutaway so that when my hand hit the bottom of the cutaway, my ring finger would be at the last fret. Stuff like that.
That's an interesting idea.
And it makes sense for if that's of value to you. But if you're not the kind of guy that wants to be able to slide up to the last fret and be able to nail it every time, it means nothing to you. So my guitars are tweaky, and they weren't sort of general populist guitars. So that changed with the bass world. And I'm sure people who know our basses are going to laugh because our basses are tweaky as well. But that being said, they're tweaky because we came up with solutions for bass players as opposed to solutions for Sheldon Dingwall.
Yeah, well, that's being market-driven as opposed to being Sheldon-driven.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of designers, a lot of guitar designers start out as guitar players, and so they're very influenced by their own needs. And that's great if you're sort of a middle-of-the-road player and you've got every man's needs. But if you're at all skilled and tweaky, you could make yourself your products could end up being too narrowly focused. And I think that was the issue with the guitars. When the basses came along, I had no idea. I was a complete outsider. But I did have that experience from piano. And everybody was asking at the time for the same thing. They were asking for a 5-string bass with a good B. And in the research I'd done, I didn't see anything that everybody else was doing that I could improve on. So at the time, I thought, I just turned down the orders, but I kept getting requests, and I kept turning them down. And then I started losing sleep trying to figure this problem out, and it was driving me crazy. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put some thought into this. And so the first place I went was to the piano world. I knew from being a child that those lower notes can sound rich. They can sound equal to notes an octave up. And that's an interesting thing about pianos is if you look at the range that a piano covers, it covers almost the entire musical range very well. However, if you look at orchestral instruments with a single scale length, you need multiple different instruments to be able to cover that same range. You need a double bass and a cello and a viol and a violin to cover the same range as a piano.
Yeah, that's right.
And so why is that? Well, if you take a look at those 4 orchestral instruments, one has a really long scale length, and at the other end, the violin has a very short scale length. And if you look at a piano or a harp, they have long scale length for the bass strings and a shorter scale length for the treble strings. So they've done essentially the same thing, but they've done it on one instrument. And so taking that to the bass world, when I first was made aware of Ralph Novak and the Novak's fan fret system, that was when I was able to piece together the concept of the piano and the harp and apply that to a bass guitar and get that long scale length on the B string and a more normal scale length on the G.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Novak because I think, today most people know you as a builder of strictly fan fret basses. But I think, and I know that you have some good knowledge of this, and I think that they would enjoy and would benefit from hearing something about the real history of fan fret instruments, and then and how, as you say, you got involved in it and it progressed from there.
Sure. I mean, the fan frets showed up way back in history. The first instrument I'm aware of is the Orfarian. And that instrument sort of died out in the Renaissance age. And then there were other instruments that I'm not as well aware of, but that surfaced with fan frets up until about the late 1800s, and then disappeared. And so when Ralph Novak started tinkering with stuff like this in the 80s, he was completely unaware of it. The patent office was completely unaware of any prior history. You had to be a real music history nerd to even be aware of these instruments. So Ralph was the guy that figured out that, the best part of a Strat are the bass strings. They're tight. You can hit them hard. They've got good harmonics. They're relatively pitch stable when you hit them hard. But the treble strings can be a little bit spiky. Contrast that with, let's say, the scale length of Les Paul, and the treble strings are very sweet on a Les Paul. They're fat sounding. They're easy to bend. But the bass strings are a little muddy, and if you hit them too hard, they're really pitchy. So he was the first guy to go, why don't we try and do the bass strings of a Strat and the treble strings of a Les Paul? Prior to that, people had tried to do, let's say like a PRS had tried to do sort of a mid scale length that kind of was halfway in between the two, and people would put humbuckers in a Strat trying to make it sound like a Les Paul, but it never really worked. So Novak was saying, those two approaches haven't worked. I'm going to try this one, and it's probably not going to work, but I'm going to try it anyways. And his original idea was to do frets for 3 strings on the bass side at one scale, and then another scale length of frets on the treble side for the treble strings. But then he had the problem of how are you going to bend across that? You're not going to be able to. So he thought, well, I'll just try connecting the dots. I'll just connect the scale length on both these strings, and the frets will be fanned out, but, who cares? It's my guitar. I don't have to worry about it. And so he did that, and he tried it out the first night, and the advantages were absolutely obvious that first night. So the next day he started working on the patent application.
Oh.
And so because there was prior history, he tended to get a lot of haters on him because of that. My view is that even if I would have seen prior history, I wouldn't have had the balls to do the experiments and do the legwork and make the prototypes happen and take them out and show them to the market. So without Ralph Novak, I never would have started doing fan frets. So I look at him as being, he's just a small guy that came up with a great idea, and he went about and patented it, and his patent was valid because the patent office said it was valid, and I think he deserves his place in history as being the modern reinventor, if that's a term, of multi-scale and fan frets.
So, and that's a really, really interesting way to explain it, and I think a lot of people are going to get some benefit out of that. Now, so at that point, when you got into starting to make basses, did you start off just doing fan frets? Yeah.
I'd taken a Fender. One thing I always tell people is you never want me doing your taxes because I can build a guitar in my head in 3D, but I can't add 3-digit numbers, or I can't multiply 2-digit numbers. So I'm a bit of an idiot savant that way. So rather than try and calculate string mass and scale length and all that kind of stuff, I just found the biggest B string I could find, and I put it on a Fender bass on where the G string is supposed to be, so that it had all the room on the headstock where I could just take a block of wood and use that as a nut and slide it up and down the headstock and find what sounded like the right scale length. And so it took an extra 3 inches of scale length to get that B string to match the E string tonally. And so that's where I came up with the 37-inch scale. This is prior to meeting Novak. And so I thought, this is a dead end because nobody's going to want to play a 37-inch scale. And when I did actually see the fan frets, then that was the eureka moment. That's where I realized, okay, you can have a 37-inch scale on the string that needs it, the B string, but you can have a more normal scale on the G and D string, where you don't need that scale length. And so within a couple of months, I met Ralph at a luthiers convention. We just, we hit it off, and I discussed how I'd like to try basses with this, and he was very much into doing it with guitars. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, you do the basses, I'll do the guitars, and we'll just go from there. So it was a handshake deal. I went home and I started designing a bass. And it's funny because I had no hardware, no pickups. The tuners were the same. That was about the only part that was usable from a regular bass.
I can imagine.
Everything else had to be done from scratch. And so it took about 4 or 5 months to come up with a design. And it's relatively similar to what we still do to this day. We've done the incremental improvements on it constantly. But essentially, if you looked at the original bass and looked at what we do today, you'd go, oh, yeah, that's the same bass.
Yeah. So in time-wise, this was in the early 90s or so? This
was in 1992.
Okay. So you get up and run and you start producing these basses, and you were doing nothing but basses at that time?
Well, I was doing more guitars, and we were also doing repairs at the time. We'd do probably at least 100 repairs a month.
Wow, that's a lot.
I had a team of 3 people, and I would build them at night. The repairs were the day gig, and they're like, I always thought of repairs as kind of the university of building guitars, because it shows you everything you don't want to do.
Yeah, that's right. It does.
And so learn from the mistakes of others. Also had a huge mentor in my life, Glenn McDougall of Fury Guitars. He lived at that. He's passed away now, but he lived in Saskatoon, where I'm from. And he was the first electric guitar manufacturer in Canada, and a manufacturing genius. So I learned a lot of manufacturing concepts from him. Learned a lot about installing truss rods that will be stable throughout humidity and temperature swings from him, and that's been amazing. We've had basses that were, in this one case, this guy from Croatia bought a used bass out of I think Texas, and he couldn't ship it to Croatia. It was too expensive, so he had to wait for friends. And so the bass went from Texas to friends in San Diego. They held on to it for a couple of months until somebody was visiting from Seattle, and then they transported the bass up to Seattle. It sat there for another couple of months until somebody was visiting from Croatia, and then they brought it back on the plane. And so this was a 6-month period from Texas to California to Seattle to Croatia. And when he opened up the case, it was still in tune.
Wow.
And that's strictly because of just being aware of how steel and wood interact with each other in terms of temperature and humidity. So
let's fast forward a few years. You're developing a good business. You're moving in a positive direction into the mid 90s. Now you've moved to a larger, fairly large facility, and then suddenly disaster strikes, and this is not a good time for Dingwall. So tell us what happened.
So our sales were good. We had 2 distributors in Japan. We had a distributor in Germany. We had several dealers in the U.S., several in Canada. And unfortunately, the building I moved into caught fire. And it was a big building, and it also had a natural gas line that went underneath the building, or at least adjacent to the building, that fed one of the major hospitals. And so for whatever reason, it started out as a tiny fire. When I got the call, I ran down there. I don't even think I had socks on. Ran down, and I get there, and it's like this little tiny puff of smoke coming out of the far corner of the building. I'm like, oh my God. Wow, I thought it was going to be so much worse. Well, fast forward 5 or 6 hours, and the fire just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then the gas line ruptured, and it was like a movie set where, when they have those explosions, there's that distinctive Hollywood sound of an explosion. Well, apparently it's not just Hollywood. That's actually what things sound like when there's a big explosion. And there was a 6-story building, and there was a 6-story fireball on top of it.
Wow. Were you there at the time that happened?
Yeah, and it went from it was really weird because I'm there and I'm watching my office window explode, and then almost like clockwork, just pieces of burning paper flying out the window, like one after another, bang, flop, flop, flop. These papers would be coming out, and I'm standing there looking at my life disappearing in front of my eyes, and I was surrounded by people that are there for the entertainment factor, and so it was. I distinctly remember that being a really odd feeling, not the most comfortable feeling either.
I can imagine. Wow.
And so when the building blew up, it went from kind of being an exciting for everybody else except me, exciting thing to sit and watch, to absolute pandemonium. People were running everywhere. Bricks were falling. Firemen were running away from the building, and the walls were collapsing behind them, and bricks were falling in front of them. It's really fortunate nobody got. I think the worst injury was one of the firemen sprained his ankle.
Wow.
But it could have been so much worse.
Oh, my gosh, I would imagine. Jeez.
And unfortunately, at that time, this is mid-'90s, backup solutions were really primitive. So I had all my backups on a shelf above my desk, assuming that the worst case scenario would be I have a hard drive failure and I have to start over again with my floppy disk backups. But so they were gone. All records were gone. All my wood was gone. All my drums and guitars from my childhood that I'd been storing were gone. All the skateboard equipment was gone. Everything. The next day I was shopping for a pencil because I had nothing to write on, or nothing to write with.
Well, you must have still been in some shock, I would imagine, huh?
Yeah, shock's actually it's a good thing. It's a protective mechanism. If you had to feel everything, every emotion that you would eventually feel once the shock wore off at the time, I'm not sure the human mind would be equipped for that amount of stress load. So the shock kind of insulates you from that. I remember about a week later, just going for a walk in the morning, and the shock was starting to wear off, and I literally lost my balance. It was like I got dizzy and had to grab onto a tree to keep from falling over.
Wow.
But that's your body's designed to absorb heavy things like this, and there's a lot worse that can happen to you than your business burning down. I mean,
well, you're still breathing, and it's like they say a lot of times. These are things, and things can ultimately be replaced. And
remember that song?
Which one?
Sorry to interrupt. Do you remember that song, "Hang On, Sloopy"?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Yeah. I forget the guy's name, but the guy that wrote that took the money he made from that song, built himself a home studio, just got it finished, it burned down, and he told the story of standing in the middle of the ashes of his studio and starting to laugh out loud because he'd survived it. And I always thought, you're freaking nuts. But when I went home from the fire and I saw my wife at the time with my baby daughter, I felt the exact same thing. It was like, oh my God, I'm the luckiest man on earth.
Yeah.
So it's really, there's so much worse that could happen to somebody. I wouldn't recommend a fire. It's nowhere near as much fun as it looks, but if it does happen, it's not the end of the world. So
you begin the recovery process, and this took quite a while. You had to go through a lot of trials and tribulations to get back up and running. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, there was the financial end of things, the insurance end of things. The first call you get after a fire is from either the police or the tax people, because unlike the criminal world, where if you're accused of something, you're assumed innocent until proven guilty. In the case of fires, they automatically assume guilt, and then you have to prove your innocence. And so I remember being interviewed by the police, and the officer that was interviewing me, he said, "Listen, this is just procedure. I'm going to have to give you this test. They're going to try and hit you with all kinds of trick questions, so don't worry about it. I mean, I can tell that you're completely innocent just by talking to you, but this is a formality. So Just fill it out as honestly as you can. And it was an interesting questionnaire to fill out. But beyond that, all the plans, all the drawings were destroyed. So everything had to be reverse engineered. And I had a lot of help with that. Glenn McDougall, who I mentioned before, helped with some tooling. My good friend Byron Olson sat with me every single day. He volunteered 2-3 hours per day to sit with me, and we recreated with calipers and rulers and recreated every part on the bases, and so that we could have them computerized files that could be backed up. You know, if it's a paper drawing of an instrument and that burns, it's gone forever. But if you've got a backup if you've done it with CAD, you can always have a copy of it. And so without their help, I never would have been able to do it. And then the Saskatoon music community got together and they did the benefits and raised funds to help deal with all the expenses, because it's really hard to know the value of everything you have, especially when half of what you own is screws and screwdrivers and really low dollar items. So I ended up being underinsured by over 50%.
Oh, boy.
So getting back into business and having to reverse engineer the instruments, that was a task that took every bit of energy, and I think at one point totaled up the number of mouse clicks, and it was well over 1 million mouse clicks. And we hadn't even finished at that point.
That's one way of looking at it. Wow.
Yeah.
So all in all, you were back in business by when?
We had the first bases ready just in time to ship down to NAM in 1998. And so
it was a year or two that really impacted you, or what?
Year and 3 months. Yeah. And so the goal was that, and we still have this goal today. The next base we build is going to be the best base we ever built. And at that time, the first base that we built after the fire was going to be the best base we ever built. And it was. As we're redesigning, it took the opportunity to make things better. And that was part of the motivation of, you know, it's not a lot of fun having to rebuild. And it would be really painful rebuilding to just be at the same position you were. So for me, it was pretty important to have that carrot of, we're not just going to rebuild, we're going to do it better. Everything's going to be better.
So it sounds like there was a little bit of ultimately a silver lining that, and I always think that, you know, philosophically that, you know, it's a bit cliche, but these things, even though they seem awful at the time, may very well be part of a larger plan, or whatever you want to say, that things kind of fall into place the way they're supposed to, and you end up in a better place as a result. And even though you have to go through something that's it's like walking through the storm, you know.
Yeah, and you know, I think attitude makes all the difference. I mean, if you think you're beaten, then you are, and if you dust yourself off and say, I'm not going to take this line down, I'm going to fight it, or I'm going to find that silver lining. Well, then you will find a silver lining.
Yeah,
it's there if you look for it.
Well, so you recovered. You're back in business. You're moving forward, and then, as you told me, in the early 2000s, you started to think a little bit about a new direction, and that had something to do with creating an import line. It would ultimately take many years for this idea to come to fruition. So I'm curious why you think it took so long, and when it finally did happen, what was and has been the effect on your business?
We had our own niche, and like any business, you're going to have cycles. And so we had cycles of growth, and then we had cycles where we're scrambling for orders. And it didn't really figure this out until recently, but right along the same time, mid-'90s, when we started with this, in my estimation, relatively futuristic base. At least the vision was futuristic. Well, that was the genesis of the retro trend. And so our initial growth all of a sudden had to compete against ripped jeans and retro music and classic rock this and classic that. So we were really swimming against the current. And there was a lot of pressure for us to do parallel frets. And so I built, in 99, at the 99 NAMM show, especially, people just kept coming up to us and saying, what are you doing with these fan frets? Nobody wants these. People want, retro jazzes. They want 50s looking instruments. You guys gotta do something about this. And our sales were showing it. Just nobody really wanted anything other than three-tone sunburst jazzes. And so went back and designed a parallel fret bass that you could swap out the neck for a fan fret. So really watered down the concept. And they were a nice bass. They were a really well-built bass. But man, I when I played them and I played the regular fan frets, I just couldn't go back. I was like, I can't sell these in good conscience. And it was fortunate because this was 99 and everything was about the new millennium. And Bass Player Magazine came out with an article called the top 10 gear ideas of the last 10 years. And they had our bass in it, and they were talking about the fan frets. And that came out just before NAMM. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, this couldn't come at a better time. So we go to the NAMM 2000, and I distinctly remember the same guy that was telling me about how we shouldn't be doing fan frets, we should be doing retro instruments, saw this new prototype of the retro parallel fret instrument and said, what are you doing this for? Fan frets are your thing. That's what you should be doing. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, fair weather.
But that one article saved us. That broke us to, or it took us out of the weirdo guys that are just doing a solution for a problem that doesn't exist to, no, these guys are more than just that. And so that helped turn around our sales. And it was pretty much steady growth from that point on. But my own personal view as a manufacturer is manufacturing is labor intensive. And labor is people, and people need a place to live. And so the cost of living affects the cost of your products. If you try and manufacture in New York, then you're going to have to pay New York rents and New York wages, and you're going to have expensive products. If you move to the middle of Nebraska where you can buy a house for $10,000, then you're going to be able to build your products at a much lower cost. Well, our housing prices were starting to go up. My wages were going up, and it was obvious that we're in a really limited market. I mean, 2% of the guitars sold in North America are over $1,000, and we were 2 or 3 times that much. So all boutique builders are in the same boat. They're all fighting for that last 1 or 2% of the market, and they're all really good at what they do. If you're a boutique builder and you're making your living, I guarantee you're making a good product. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to make a living at it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so we needed to go down market. And so I designed an instrument. It was called our Afterburner. That was 2 names. One, I like the name from jet planes, and it sounded cool and it sounded exciting. And 2, it was the first bass we built after the fire, or first bass designed after the fire. And so designed that with an eye to have it manufactured by somebody larger. And so it was an entry level. I think street price was going to be $1,200, and it was built to be manufactured very efficiently. And I started shopping around at manufacturers and found out this is a completely different game. When you're an artisan businessman, your mindset, your cash flow, your business model, your business structure as far as distribution goes is completely different than if you're an actual full-fledged manufacturer. And so being able to get up to that next level from artisan to actual true guitar business or true manufacturing business took probably 8 years and 15 different factories rejecting us. And so ended up having to build the afterburner ourselves because we couldn't get anybody to do it for us. And that turned out to be not a bad thing. It's still one of our number one sellers. We still manufacture it in-house. And so when it came time to, when we finally got the imports happening, rather than do the safe thing, which is to take your bestseller and make a cheap version of it, decided to design something based off of it, but it was its completely own thing, and gave it a whole new model designation. And I don't remember the logic behind that. That just seemed to make the most sense. And so we started with what we called the combustion. And again, it was based on the afterburner, but it was its own model. And combustion kind of had a tie into afterburner as far as names go.
Sure, I can see that.
And so that was a huge undertaking. In order to get a factory to even talk to us, I had to do like a 300-piece minimum, which was, that was rolling the dice on the company. If it would have gone south, that would have been the end of us. But the bases sold well. There was really good interest. Kind of did a crowdsourcing thing where we told our customers what we were doing and solicited ideas for colors and things like that, and fingerboards, and I learned one thing, and that is what people will say their preference is on an online poll is not necessarily what they will actually buy. So online polls are kind of useful, but they're not written in stone. You can't trust them, but at least gives you some sort of data to work with. So we had our 300 bases, and we started selling those, and they were selling really well.
And those were ultimately made where?
They were made in China.
Okay.
And then they were shipped to us, and we would re-level the frets. We would go through them with a fine-tooth comb and check every screw, check every pod, every wire, make sure everything was 100%, and then do a professional setup. And it's amazing how much a setup affects the feel of a guitar.
Sure, of course it does.
And so these bases built a reputation for being roadworthy, and that was, we used quality components. We used switchcraft jacks. Most of the instruments out of China used cheap, lowest possible cost jacks that failed fairly regularly. I took the opposite approach because of my history with being a musician, playing in really out of the way places and having equipment failure, and knowing what a pain it is to try and get your gear fixed when you're in Yellowknife or when you're in Alaska or who knows where in the boonies.
Yeah.
And also took my repair experience, knowing, okay, what's the most common failure point on an electric guitar? What's the jack? So good quality jacks, good quality bridges. We manufacture the truss rods, same ones we're using on our bases and the Made in Canada bases, and we ship those to China. And we manufacture the pickups. And so we had a lot of...
So a lot of Canadian parts going to China and then coming back to you, right?
Yeah, it got to the point where I was going, this is ridiculous, because we're buying our magnets from China, so they're flying across the Pacific. We build pickups, they fly back across the Pacific to get put into a base. Then they cross the Pacific again, and if we sell them in Asia, then they cross the Pacific a fourth time.
Wow.
And I'm just going, this is just, I'm not a super green guy, but even that was too much for me. So, we eventually addressed that. But, the bases were professional level. And I've always felt you can either spend money on marketing or you can spend it on quality. And I've always chosen, if I only have $1 to spend and I have to choose between one or the other, I'll spend it on quality. Yeah. And so they sold really well. And we did another run, and they sold really well. But we started to hit, I think we started to saturate the market for that particular model. And during that time, we met a musician named Adam Nolly Getgood. And Adam had joined a band called Periphery as the bass player, even though Adam was a guitar player and a producer. He joined as the bass player. And the bass player that that was in the band prior to him was playing one of our basses, and so Adam was familiar with the tone and really liked the tone. So he came to us, came forward looking to buy a couple of basses, and so I took an instant liking to him because he's just the most personable guy. When he started playing, I was like really impressed with his style. It was a fresh new style that I'd never heard before. And so, we endorsed him and sold him a couple of basses at artist pricing. And just built a relationship from there. And little did I know how much of an effect he would have. But after those two basses, he ordered a couple more, and the relationship just kept growing, and he got more familiar with our product. And he came to us and said, I'd like to do an artist model, and I'd like to use you, and I'd like to use Dark Glass, one of the suppliers. And so we'd like it to be based on the combustion, and he wanted it to be affordable because he knew his audience and he knew who would be buying the bass. And so him and I and the Dark Glass team met up at NAMM and would have breakfast together at Denny's and would have supper together at downtown Disney, and would just hash out all these ideas for preamps and colors and things like that. So over supper in downtown Disney, we came up with the concept of a 3-band preamp with no treble control. It's a bass; it doesn't really need a treble control, but it could use 2 mid controls. So it's a bass, low mid, high mid. And as far as I know, that's still the only bass preamp out there that is a 3-band with no treble. And so we put that together, and that's been explosive for us. The combination of that preamp and Adam's reputation and the bright colors. I mean, Adam's more in the metal market, and at that time things were still black and pointy. And we came out with these brightly colored basses with carbon fiber looked pickguard and a really aggressive sound. And it just sort of took off from there.
And those are import or Canadian?
These would be based on the combustion, and they're built parallel to the combustion in China.
Okay. And it's part of your regular line now as well?
Yes. So that would be the NG series. Mm-hmm. And so it's essentially very similar to the combustion, but different electronics package, different pickup placement, and bright solid colors as opposed to transparent natural colors.
Now, the one thing I noticed, and I mentioned to you the other day, was that unlike some other builders who have gone to doing import lines that are really seen as separate, or they're separate lines that are really distinctively different, you've really integrated that into your whole line, so it's really just at one side of the line, but if you look at them, at all the instruments you make, they're all sort of together, and it really makes it a little bit more cohesive. Is that deliberate, and does that make a difference?
I don't know if it makes much of a difference sales-wise, because man, there's some really successful companies out there that have versions of their North American-made guitars that are selling for $699.
Yeah.
And I think if we did that, we'd be probably way more successful than we are now. But success is one of those things that it really depends on how you measure it. And I personally don't measure success strictly in terms of how many basses we sell and how much money we make. So I'm more concerned with a customer receiving. I mean, it doesn't matter what price point the bass is at. If it's $699, then that's probably the most expensive bass that this customer has ever bought. So it's all their money going towards that bass. And if it's a $2,000 bass, that's probably the most expensive bass they've ever bought. And so I always try and look at it that way. And so I only want to sell something that I feel comfortable I would stand behind, and I would go, you're spending all your money on that bass, and that bass will not let you down.
Yeah.
And you can get whatever you want from China. You can get whatever level of quality you want from crap to fantastic. I mean, look at the iPhones. They're built in China, and they're amazing. But they're not cheap by any any stretch of the imagination.
That's for sure.
Doesn't matter if it's China or Indonesia, if you want high quality, you're going to have to pay for it. And so we pay a lot for our instruments, and then we put a lot of labor into them at this end. So they end up being expensive, but they're a bass that you can take on a world tour, and it will survive that tour, and it will be comparable to any bass at any price. Well,
so now it's nearly 30 years down the road, or it's around 30 years somewhere. I want to ask you, it's kind of a subjective thing, but how you see your position in the bass market, what kind of growth, if any, you're looking for, how do you hope to achieve it? And also, it seems to me, I don't know if you're the only bass builder that does strictly fan fret, but certainly that must be a factor in it too. So it's a big question, another big question, but how do you see it?
I think we are the only bass builder that is strictly fan fret, and that almost cost the company several times just from being stubborn. But it all goes back to there's a sense of pride and purpose, and I see no purpose in doing something where I'm only selling something to make money. This has to be a tool that affects people's lives, and it has to be a tool that contributes to society as a whole. And we're the guitars. We're not saving lives here. So it is a small contribution, but there has to be a contribution. And I don't really have a good perspective on where we fit in the industry. I do know that fan frets are much more popular now than they've ever been. Did we have anything to do with that? Maybe. It's pretty hard to Google fan fret bass and not see one of ours. So I'm sure we've had some influence. And I've seen direct knockoffs of our basses. I've seen the popularity of bright colors explode in the metal world. Was that us, or did we just happen to be sort of at the front end of a trend that was going to happen anyways? I don't know. But it is nice to see that instead of being this little weirdo company way off to the left of center, that the market has come towards us. So maybe we're just so far out ahead of the market, and it just kind of caught up with us, or maybe we had some influence. I don't know, but it is nice to be a little more mainstream these days than in our entire history.
Well, it's taken you a while to get there, but that's got to be a good feeling, though. Yeah, and as far as growth goes, sales aren't the issue. It's how do we grow and maintain without slipping in terms of quality, and so that's our biggest problem. Is we can only grow so fast and maintain quality because it requires people. They have to be trained, and that's a slow process. So currently, we've been turning down some of the largest dealers in the world because we can't supply them in the quantities they need. And if we did, we couldn't guarantee the quality that we wanted. So we're saying no to sales. I think any true business person would slap me in the face if they heard that, but that's just how we roll, and we'll eventually get there. And we've grown way more than I ever expected we could, and we'll continue to do that. Well, I think that's a very, very positive view. And as we're running out of time here, I just want to ask you one last kind of perspective question. And it's kind of, how do you see the state of the industry? But also, do you see any challenges or opportunities ahead of us? With the Gibson thing hitting the news in the last year, everybody was quick to jump on the guitar is dead story. And in my opinion, nothing could be further from the truth. We'll probably never see the numbers that we saw in the 60s or even the 70s, but the guitar is anything but dead. What is happening is there's an underground movement that the mainstream media hasn't been aware of. There are tons of guitar players, tons of young kids taking on the guitar.
you got a phone in your pocket now that you can meet girls with. So you don't need a guitar to meet girls like you used to back in the 70s or the 60s. So there are going to be fewer non-musicians buying guitars for the wrong reasons. And that's not a bad thing. But there still are going to be true musicians, true guitar players buying instruments, playing instruments, and spreading music. Just because the market is changing doesn't mean it's going away. And we're seeing that in our growth. We're seeing it in our contemporaries' growth. And if we take Gibson as an example, I took a look at their booth at Nashville NAMM. They're doing amazing stuff. I was blown away by the creativity and what they're doing. I think the brand itself, if you take away the what turned out to be a bad decision to buy Philips Electronics, if you take that away from the equation, I think the Gibson guitar brand itself is still strong. It's still going to grow. It's still going to be a popular brand.
Yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah. And can't really blame Henry for the decision he made. Lots of other companies are doing the same thing. I mean, it just didn't work out in his favor that time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great perspective, and that kind of brings us to the end. But I really want to thank you for taking a lot of time and giving us a real detailed view of Dingwall basses and the history and a lot of good stuff. And I've certainly known of you for a long time and followed what you've done. And so it's a pleasure to have you on. And I hope we can chat again and see how things have changed along the way.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And thanks for what you do. It's really cool to have you focusing in on the guitar business, which I think is one of the greatest businesses in the world. I mean, what other business do competitors get along so well? I room with one of my number one competitors when we go to Asia. We share hotel rooms, and pretty much anybody in the industry can call anybody else for help and advice. It's an unbelievably tight-knit group.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and thanks for the compliment. And that's what we're doing. I mean, we're guitar business. I mean, I think that's our brand. That's where we're going. And, we're doing all these other things around the idea of guitar business. So there's other business outlets out there that are more broader based, but I think we're really the one that's focused in on guitar. So again, thanks so much. And I look forward to talking with you and staying in touch.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Welcome back to the back of the show. We assume that if you made it this far, you're probably willing to take a chance on unpredictable topics and discussion that you might not expect on a guitar-related show. And that being said, I'm always interested to hear your comments on the interviews that we do. We're constantly trying to bring you a diverse array of individuals with stature in the business. I know that's a broad criteria, but I think we know it when we see it. So we'll continue to search out and deliver the best from players to builders and CEOs to entrepreneurs. And if you have some thoughts about any of our interviews, visit the official episode page on our website and scroll to the bottom where you'll find the comments section. Or you can do basically the same thing on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business. Same username on both platforms at Guitar Business. So I thought there were a number of interesting moments in the interview with Sheldon Dingwall. While many of the folks we have on the show have done other interviews, and some have done many, we're always looking to cover the uncovered, drilling down into the details that really add to the story in a way that ultimately offers more value to our listeners from an informational as well as an inspirational perspective. For example, the catastrophic fire that wiped out Dingwall's entire business in the mid-90s shows how the passion and determination that's required to meticulously recreate all the pieces of his company, literally from scratch, played such a vital role. And considering the huge amount of time and patience it took to bring the business back to life, it's a great lesson that ties in very well with a lot of the things that we talk about on this show. What is it that drives us to put in that kind of effort under really difficult circumstances? And do you remember when Sheldon said there would have been no point in putting it back together just to be like it was? It had to be better. And in the end, it was. As they were going back through every single piece of the business, recreating all of the instrument plans and tools and every other aspect, how could you not discover ways to improve on what you had previously done? Now, I would never suggest, and I don't think anyone would suggest, that we should have to go through this kind of catastrophe to be able to take things to the next level. But I do remember saying to him that it looked like there was a silver lining after all. The fact is that Sheldon knew what his destination was at that time. Get back into business as quickly as possible. But I'm sure he wasn't at all clear on exactly how that was going to happen or how long it was going to take. But certainly he kept his options open during the entire journey, and the puzzle pieces ultimately fell into place. So what's the takeaway for the rest of us? Not to be too cliche, but life is full of curveballs. You never quite know what's coming. The best thing we can do is have embedded within us a solid set of basic principles that keeps us grounded and centered no matter what is thrown at us. You can see real-life examples of this at play all the time. Different people react to the same external conditions differently. Just look around. You'll see it. What's the most obvious character difference between people who handle adversity in a positive way, maybe turning lemons to lemonade, as they say, and someone who doesn't handle it very well at all? More often than not, in my opinion, it has to do with believing in yourself. It's pretty basic stuff. Nothing revolutionary here. Just common sense. You would think anyway. So, while you're thinking about all that, as always, stay positive, stay focused on your destination, and keep all the options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on episode 31. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.